Welcome to Hard Truth Stories. Carol and Mark met in their early 20s and within 6 months got engaged and then married the following year. Mark worked full-time and Carol part-time, and they bought a house and turned it into their dream home. They spent the next few years traveling and enjoying their time together. As they neared the age of 30, they decided to have a child, and the next year their baby was born. Carol stopped working, and since it was only part-time, it didn't affect them that much. After a few years, Carol and her friends started watching a lot of women on social media talking about how they needed to make sure that even if they were married with children, everyone needed to understand that they were still independent women and that they need a life outside the marriage and that their husbands just needed to cope with it. Mark saw this behavior and sat down and talked to Carol. Mark explained that they were in their 30s now and she needed to understand that they had a child and that she needed to grow up and focus on what was important, and not what a bunch of fake and unhappy social media people were saying. Carol didn't like this and started going to a therapist to voice her frustration that things had changed and she didn't like it. The therapist was a woman who embraced the modern theories that women were never wrong, and no matter what they felt, that men needed to bow down and agree with everything they want or feel. Carol started talking about this at home and Mark finally had enough. Mark said that marriage was a partnership and that, especially when you have children, you have to give up the selfish and childish part of yourself and live up to your responsibilities and commitments. These disagreements continued for months and Carol continued to watch the toxic social media women and going to her therapist to gain validation. Mark was becoming exasperated with everything going on and told Carol that her actions were negatively affecting their marriage and their family. Carol went to her therapist and told her what Mark had said. The therapist told her that she needed to test Mark and that this would force him to do what she said and wished from then on. She said to threaten Mark with divorce and that he would fall in line and do what she says. Carol came home and waited for Mark to arrive from work. When Mark arrived, Carol said that she wanted to do whatever she wished and that Mark needed to agree and make her happy at all times. Mark responded that she had changed for the worse and was not the woman he had met, fell in love with, and married those years ago. Mark said she had turned into a selfish and childish person who turned her back on him, their family, and her vows she made on their wedding day. Carol then said that if Mark did not do what she said, that she wanted a divorce. Mark shook his head in sadness. His wife was truly lost in her own delusion and selfishness. Mark looked into her eyes and told her that she was truly lost and that he agreed and they would get divorced. Carol stood in stunned silence. Her therapist had said that Mark would back down and submit to her. After several seconds, Carol said that he was not even fighting for her and that they should go to her therapist and she would settle this between them. Mark spoke calmly and said that her so-called therapist was nothing but an unhappy woman who was brainwashing her clients to keep them in therapy for life to get all their money. Mark said he knew it was the manipulative therapist and the fake social media influencers that she had listened to and changed her for the worse. Mark turned around and went into the other room, already on the phone making plans for their separation. After 3 months of separation, Carol knew she had made the biggest mistake of her life, betraying her loving and caring husband. She went to the house to talk to him and ask forgiveness and to try again. She knocked on the door and Mark and his new girlfriend answered. Surprise on their faces. Carol's heart dropped and she knew it was over and she turned and left without a word. 6 months later and Carol is alone in her tiny apartment by herself. Carol sits alone and thinks about her regrets of going to the therapist and watching those so-called social media influencers. She had everything and threw it all away by acting like a spoiled child. Mark and his new kind and caring girlfriend stand in the kitchen preparing to serve the supper they had been preparing. Mark smiles and looks at Anne, a beautiful young woman who doesn't care about social media and who has not been brainwashed into thinking that selfishness is more important than people. They sit down to a nice meal and the bright future ahead.